We're ready to start again. Hello, everybody. We had a few questions in the break, which tends to suggest that it's just the room is too big and people are just feeling a bit shy. That's okay. We've got a lot to get through, and we can always answer questions later. But
and the BOF.
And the BOF, I forgot to say. Sorry, Josh is doing a BOF tonight. I'll be there. I'll be there. What time? We don't know.
We don't know. But if you have more questions about Spring, come there.
Yeah, come and find us. We'll be around. So right now, we thought maybe we'd take a step back and look at a sort of big picture of Spring Boot, what all is in there. And there's
no slides. Oh, there we are.
a few things that we could just go into more detail on, but let's just look at the big chunks first. So here are a list of modules. So in the traditional Spring sense, these are jar files, basically. So Spring Boot, there is a springboot.jar, which is the main library that's got the Tomcat and Jetty embedded server. It's got the enable auto configuration annotation, and it's got some. Actually, no, it doesn't. It's got the at conditional stuff, so all the conditions that are used by at enable auto configuration. Next bullet point, Spring Boot auto configure.jar has the at enable auto configuration, and also most of the existing implementations of the stuff that is imported automatically for you using that annotation. I'll show you how that works in a minute. Then we've seen the Spring Boot starters, a set of convenient dependency descriptors. Spring Boot CLI, you saw that. That's the command line. It's packaged as a jar file, actually, but there's a zip download that has the jar file and a shell script, so you can do either. It's a jar file. And so that compiles the Groovy source. Most of it is to do with auto-configuration of Groovy, specifically, compilation and adding the imports and stuff like that. Then, something we haven't seen yet, the Spring Boot Actuator, is those common non-functional features that I talked about briefly at the beginning. So adding some management endpoints, for instance, to make an app more supportable and deployable in production. I think we're going to show that stuff, actually maybe not immediately, but pretty soon. Then there are some tools. So we saw the Maven and Gradle plugins, and indirectly we saw, which is packaged as a separate jar because it's shared between Maven and Gradle, the launcher conveniences. So there are 3 ways to launch a Spring application. If it's a jar file, you use a jar launcher. If it's a war file, you use a war launcher. If it's a collection of stuff that you want to put on the class path and then run a main application in various different locations, then you can use properties launcher, and that's actually pretty useful for things like where you have an app in production that's got read-only deployable assets and read-write configurable stuff, and you want that to include class path entries. You can point the properties launcher at many different locations and get it to load the class path from those. So there's some convenient stuff there in the tools. And then there's samples, loads of samples. We mainly use them for integration testing. They're not so much designed to be consumed as demo applications, but please feel free to look at them, and I might have some call to do that in the presentation soon. The Getting Started guides are another really good source of sample applications if you want to see how Spring Boot works. So, picture that describes those things in terms of dependencies. There you've got the starters and Spring Boot, and depending on Spring, for instance, and the tools not depending on Spring. So the tools are, actually there's a dependency on Spring Core, which is a tiny little jar file that not many people know about, but it's just got utilities in it and resource abstractions and things like that, and ASM critically. So there's some things that depend on Java only, some things that depend on Spring only, some things that depend on Groovy only, and we try to keep it as compact as possible. Okay, so here's a nice feature. If you're not writing a web application, this is something that I alluded to already with Spring Batch applications. If you're not writing a web application, you need to tell Spring to do something, right? You start an application context. Well, that's fine if it's going to sit and listen on a socket HTTP endpoint, for instance. But if it's not, then you need to tell it, do this. And so we actually have a special purpose interface for that in Spring Boot. It's called Command Line Runner. And it's special purpose basically because it takes the same form of arguments as a main method. So if you put a bean of this type anywhere in your application context, it will be executed after the application context has started. So everything will be fully formed and auto-wireable. I'm not going to demo that specifically. New feature, recently I think M5 introduced this. SpringApplicationBuilder is another layer of convenience on top of Spring Application itself, basically. So if you want to do more complex things, to build a hierarchy of application context, for instance, or if you want to specify what profiles to use by default, for instance, that kind of thing. So in this case, I'm doing create an application context using this configuration class, make it run in these profiles, and then create another application context whose parent is that one, and then run that.
That returns application
context. And that returns an application context. Yeah, the run method is essentially the build method, and that's going to return the application context itself. So that's the kind of fluent API. People like fluent APIs. I like fluent APIs. This is a really useful way to build up a slightly more complex use case than just the basic convenience that you get from SpringApplication.run. Okay, so a little bit about environments and profiles. We had a show of hands on this already. And I showed you the app profile stuff in the source code. So environment and profiles is a feature of Spring 3.1. It's a very powerful and useful mechanism for varying the behavior of your application depending on where it's running. So in development, it runs in a slightly different way than in production. You know, you wish it wouldn't because you want it to be as similar as possible, but you know, that's life. Things change a little bit between environments. The other thing I can do with this, which is quite powerful, is to have the same jar file can basically run in different styles. Like it can be a server and a client, or it can be a worker and a slave, a master and slave, that kind of thing. And usually what you do is it's always been available since Spring 3.1, right? You just use system properties or operating system environment variables to switch it on and off. So spring.profiles.active is the system variable.
-D.
-D, so that kind of system variable. And if it's an environment variable, because of operating system restrictions, you can't use period separators, so it's underscore. And you can capitalize it if you like. So that's always been available since Spring 3.1.
It's not, the strings are arbitrary, so you can specify
the profile names, yeah, sure. I've been talking about development and production, but those are just strings.
Like cloud, dev, QA,
yeah.
whatever, integration.
Unlike a lot of other things, Spring Boot has no opinions about that whatsoever. You can choose your profile names. We don't have any specific profiles that we like to use, but commonly they're things like dev and prod and test and things like that. Cloud, that's right, yeah. That's the one I use the most is cloud when I'm deploying to Cloud Foundry. Okay, so one thing you can do then with Spring Boot, where we do have some features in Spring Boot, is instead of using system properties or operating system environment variables, which are a very useful mechanism and you have to use them sometimes, but there are other ways to do this, and they all feed into the same mechanism in Spring Boot, which is what's important. So you actually saw me doing this in the demo. I did --debug, and it kind of didn't work on the command line for some reason, but that was a groovy command line thing. I'll have to look at that later. You can add command line switches to your application, and that will switch them on and off. And I guess I can demo that quickly using my existing application. So let's say I wanted to have a value injected. I'm going to say hello to somebody parametrically instead of doing it the way that instead of doing it the way that Josh was trying to do it. I'll try and do it this way. I'll take that off and just make that args. Hello group, and that's going to be private string group. Okay, so if you hadn't seen that idiom before in Spring, you can inject an @value, which is a placeholder. $brace is the placeholder signifier. So I'm looking for a Spring environment property called group, Okay, so how am I going to get that there? And then I'm going to say hello to it. And I'm actually going to make it default to DevOps. How about that? So if I run this now, fingers crossed there isn't another one running, then it will say hello DevOps from Java. But if I build the jar file again, just so you can I can show you that again. I can do ---- group equals Josh.
Spring fans.
Spring fans, why not? And fingers crossed. There we go. So that's injected it from the command line, and the way that happened was the Spring environment was enhanced with everything that was found on the command line beginning with ----. So ---- group, ---- name, ---- Here's an interesting one. Some of them are built into Spring Boot. ---- server.port will start that Tomcat instance up on a different port. I could show you that happening, but you'll believe me that it works. So there are these are sort of the first extension mechanisms that you can use to enhance your own code and also to change the behavior of Spring Boot. Just add environment properties. They can be command line arguments, or they can be externalized to files. Okay, so the first place you might think of putting it would be a properties file. Okay, we actually have an opinion now, which I'll show you how to change, but it just seemed like it was something that everybody did every single time they wrote an application. They did that context property placeholder thing, and they added a file to config.property. So we thought, okay, let's just do that and pick a name. So the default is application.properties. If you put that on your class path, application.properties. If you put that on your class path, I can do that quickly. We know how to do that, don't we? New file, source, main, resources, application.properties. Oops. If I could type, these things would go a lot better, I'm sure. And then I just need to convince Maven that it's really on the class path. And then I could do server.port 9000 and group Spring properties. Okay? And then if actually I won't even bother doing it from the jar file again, I'll just run it from here. Demo application.
Did all that work after all? Update the project.
Yeah, exactly. Then if I run it, you could use equal signs. Yeah, that's just Java properties, right? Properties files can have semicolons or equals.
Or spaces.
So that didn't work because, of course, it's not running on at port 8080 anymore. Or spaces on their own? I think you need to separate it, don't you?
I think it...
Oh, maybe it works with spaces. I don't know. I've never done that. 9000. Okay, hello, Spring properties from Java. So
that fixes our problem before from having the same thing on multiple ports.
It does, doesn't it? Yes.
Multiple projects.
Okay, so that's an application properties, which is just a naming convention, right? And we've picked one. If you don't like it, that's okay. I'll show you how to change it. So there's some overrides there. The command line will always win. The file that we just created will always beat anything that's on the class path, anything else that's on the class path. Oh, hang on. Yeah, there's a file name that you can add. That you can add. That's actually something that is worth doing on the command line. Let me do that. Delete that. Create a new file here. Where is it? New file, application.properties. This is quite useful. So now I can do group file system properties. So this is now a file in the current working directory is the way that we're going to arrange this, right?
But Spring Boot doesn't know about its name application.properties, but
it has the naming convention for the file name, right, and the default place it's going to look is in the current working directory. Okay. Again, that's something that you can configure. So, and now I actually don't know which port we're running on. We're running on 9000. Okay, so use both files. but the file system one took precedence over the class path one. So that means that that's the most common use case, right? You want to change it at runtime, so point to a different location. Where was I? Okay, so externalizing properties. You can also, and this is something I like to do, you can use YAML. YAML is very popular in the Ruby Python community. It just behaves a bit like properties files, but it's more structured, it's nested. So that's server.port. I can do server.port :9000 if I want, and that's still valid as far as Spring Boot is concerned. But it's hierarchical, right? So if I had other server properties to specify, they would be nested down here with an indent. So it's indent matching. So if you want to do that, then you just have to add the YAML, snake YAML.jar to your class path, and it'll read the YAML file. One of the main reasons for doing that is because of binding to different properties, and I'll show you that feature later. The next thing I want to show is another Spring Boot feature which we found useful in that Cloud Foundry app, for instance. So one of the things there, one of the problems we had there was people don't understand all the conventions that we use, right? So there are people running our app who not only don't know Spring, they don't know Java. All they want to do is just tell me how to run this app. And they run it and it breaks, and they don't understand why. And the reason it didn't run was 9 times out of 10 when we looked at the support request, it was because they'd configured it wrong. So we wanted a way to basically blow up the application and fail to start with a nice warning message or a nice error message if they screwed up the application configuration. And so the best way I could think of to do that was to take that properties file or YAML file and bind it to a Java bean. And Spring knows all about how to do that, right? It has binding, it has conversion, it has type coercion, all that stuff up the wazoo. So we should just be able to use that. Why not? So this is what we did. We created @configuration properties. So that's something that you add to a Java bean with getters and setters, or if you don't like that, you can use Project Lombok. Anybody using Project Lombok?
Oliver.
Oliver, if he's here, yeah. So you say @configuration properties, and then you say, if you want to, you can say prefix equals, and then the prefix is a prefix in the properties file. So mine dot, and then location is the property name inside the Java object. And then you see, if the user specifies mine dot path instead of mine dot location, it's going to blow up. It's going to say unknown property cannot find property with setter for path. And it won't tell you the right name, but we could probably work on that. So you get basically more fail fast and more type safe configuration. It's a way to turn, that's a way to summarize this. It's a way to turn an type unsafe flat property file into a type safe Java object using all the armory that Spring has.
So, first of all, do you remember 10 plus years ago, almost 10 years ago, there's actually a property file-based way of configuring Spring Beans?
Yeah, there still is. Still works.
Really?
Yeah.
Where's it from?
Rod Johnson added that. Like
yeah.
In,
Is that in the actual?
It's still in there, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Properties bean loader or something like that. It still works.
Finally, it's used type
We've
safe
converging.
now.
We've converged, yeah.
And then also, the question was, how are we doing the conversions?
Standard Spring conversion service. So there's the slide on that. So it's using a data binder. It's using actually a custom data binder that we wrote, but it's using the normal conversion service that it gets from the application context. In Spring Boot, if you're using @enable configuration or @enable auto configuration, we'll add one for you, but you could override it obviously in the normal way. So that will do type coercion and conversion using anything that's available to Spring, basically, which is what you're used to. So you could convert, strings to resources, class path resources, strings to internet addresses, that kind of thing. Also, you can add validation. So a nice thing you can do if JSR 303 is present, that's the validation standard, then you can add @not null, for instance, to one of your Java Bean properties, and it will then fail at runtime if it's invalid as well. If if you don't set it, all right. And there are various options for that. And the reason we wrote our own data binder, which is the last bullet point here, the reason we did that is because we wanted to support some sort of relaxed binding, some obvious problems that are caused by different naming conventions. So for instance, environment variables not having periods in them causes problems. So what we do is we try an exact match, and then we try a number of different other options, like we try capital letters, we try underscores instead of periods, we try camel case instead of underscores, we try various combinations of obvious ways to spell the property that you've tried to specify, and if we find one that works, we take it. And that's proved to be quite useful. Okay, so I said you could customize the configuration location. You do that with, now that you know that you can do relaxed binding, you probably guess that you can do it with spring.config.name or spring_config_name. So that will specify the name of the application, i.e. application is the default. Or you could specify a complete location for it. Instead of being on the class path, you could make it a URL, right? HTTP something, something, something. And you do that either on the class path like that, or you can do -d, or you can do an operating system variable, all of the above. Then we have some support for Spring profiles in the binding and the properties config initialization itself. So the first thing you can do is you can actually specify the default profile. I haven't shown that here, but if you do spring.profile.active at the top of your properties file, then that will be the default, profile, right? But, and this is a nice thing, so in YAML, you have this document structure. So you have multiple documents in the same file, and that basically translates into multiple Java util properties or Java util map instances in the same file, and each one can then can refer to a different Spring profile. So this one is the default, so it doesn't have any specific Spring profile. Then the next document is only active in development with PostgreSQL database. So I found that really useful to have application.yaml have multiple profiles in it if I'm running in, for instance, Cloud Foundry and on my local machine as well. If you don't like YAML or you don't want to use YAML, you can do the same thing with properties files, but it's a naming convention, and we use minus property name, minus profile name as the name of the file to search. And we'll do that for you, but out of the box there are ways that you can change that. Okay. Yeah, we could demo a lot more of this stuff, but we'll run out of time if we do everything. Logging, we have an opinion about. It's always been a bit frustrating for new Spring users or modern Spring users that the Spring framework itself is tied to the Commons Logging API, and there's nothing we can do about that. But we can, with Spring Boot, we can put a layer on top of that so that you can, by default, use something more modern like Logback. And so SLF4J is our first choice, and so if you have Logback and SLF4J on your class path, then we'll set that up for you. If you have, we don't care though, if you have Log4j instead, then we'll set that up for you. And similarly, Java util logging, but I wouldn't recommend using that. So, for instance, some of the features we add a default config file, so you don't have to think about that. If you just want some logging, you just include Logback on your class path. Done, all right? That is as simple as we could make it. And the defaults will, for instance, give you this nice color output in a terminal. Okay, it looks nice. But, you know, that's not unimportant. It also gives you some, you know, opinions about what levels to log at with various things, like it doesn't do verbose output for things that we don't think are very interesting. And it's info for everything else. So the way that works then is a little bit under the covers here. There's an ApplicationContext initializer, which is a Spring 3 feature. It might be 3.1.
3.1.
Yeah, I think it's 3.1. So ApplicationContext initializer is something that was already there. We're just using it. If you want to know how, we added like 5 or 6 initializers. They get called, it's a sort of underused API in the past because it's quite hard to get into the life cycle early enough. It's before the application context starts to load any bean definitions. So it's actually literally initializing the application context itself, not the bean definitions.
Particularly valuable when you want to programmatically configure your application context in a dispatcher servlet environment where you have web.xml and no other hook.
Yeah, even if you're not using web.xml, it's useful. But yeah, so it's mostly used in web environments. I would definitely say that. But now it's used in Spring Boot. And there are a number of them provided out of the box, including the config file one that loads the application.properties. Okay, so you saw this demo already. I added JDBC and HSQL. Actually, I used H2, didn't I? And then that will give you an in-memory database. It also gives you the Tomcat connection pool. Here's a common thing you want to do, right? If you're writing a web application or even a web service, there's a lot of times when you just want to have static resources. For UIs, it's going to be style sheets, images, that kind of thing. And there's a way to configure it with Spring, right? There's always a way to configure it with Spring, but we thought, well, why not just start with a default that everybody should be happy with? So the easiest thing is just to put those things in the class path under /static. If you do that, then they'll just be visible to the world through your web interface. If you don't like /static, then there are synonyms, so you can use /public, /resources, /meta-inf resources. These are just a few common patterns that we saw in demo and sample apps in the wild, so we just copied them. Or you can use the normal servlet context. So if you're building a WAR file, then just the normal place where you put static resources would also work. Plus, incidentally, there's special treatment for index.html. There's a special file name. If that is found in any of those locations, then we say, okay, that's the welcome page. You know what a welcome page is in a servlet environment, which is actually very useful if you're using Thymeleaf.
This guy's here, by the way.
Yeah, the Thymeleaf guys are here. If you want to talk to the authors of this, two of them live in Spain, I just learned, so they came to DevOps. And we chose Thymeleaf. It's an opinion, but you don't have to accept it. If you don't put Thymeleaf on the class path, you won't get it. But on the other hand, if you do add Thymeleaf to the class path, you're going to get a lot of useful things. And the spring.io website that we saw earlier, that was written using Thymeleaf. So we quite like Thymeleaf. The reason I like Thymeleaf, or the reason I prefer it over JSP, at least anyway, is because you can test the templates, right? You can use a Spring MVC test environment and just run the whole cycle, get the response, do some matching on the HTML responses or XML responses if they're XML.
Plus, it's HTML5 friendly, and it's clean,
friendly, it's clean, it's lightweight, it's all the stuff that you want. And they do have some Spring support already, but it didn't have as strong opinions as we wanted it to have. So we just add a bit of extra stuff for you. We'll auto-configure everything you need to use Thymeleaf if you just add it to the class path. So add it to the class path and then put your templates in class path /templates, and then it'll start working. Override that with a prefix. There are various settings that we add. So here's another hint that we're providing properties-based configuration for some common things. We don't like to do this for everything, right? Java APIs are probably better for most things, but really common things like, it would be really irritating if I had to write my own Java class just to change the prefix for where to put the templates in Thymeleaf. So, okay, we'll give you a sensible default. If you want it to be something else, add it to application.properties. So spring.thymeleaf.prefix is an example. There are other things it provides. It provides a view resolver, a template engine that loads the templates and renders them, and a template resolver, which is actually the thing that looks for stuff in there in the templates.
Yay, Thymeleaf.
Yay, Thymeleaf. All right. So there's the auto-configured behavior that we currently support, and it's actually gone off the bottom of the slide because since I wrote this slide, it's the list has extended.
Good problem to have.
Good problem to have, yeah. So, I even put some things all on one line that probably deserve their own line. There's a load of stuff there, right? If you want more, then, this list will definitely grow over time. What we've chosen to do in terms of, roadmap product management strategy is we're not going to do everything in the first release, but we're going to do what we think is, most common and most popular. And we're going to focus really hard on those other things. If you remember the Spring I/O diagram that Josh showed at the beginning, Spring XD and Grails are very important to us, so we want to support them. Anything that either Grails or Spring XD will need in the next release, next 6 months or so, a year maybe with Grails, we're going to do now. And then we'll cover everything else as and when, right? Things that we think people will enjoy using. And some of these have been contributed by the community, loosely speaking community. I mean, mainly people within Pivotal, but the mobile was contributed by Roy Clarkson, for instance. AMQP was contributed by Greg Turnquist, so there are people just kind of beavering away in the background, adding this stuff. It's actually quite easy to do, and Greg wrote a blog, so if you go to spring.io/blog and search for Spring Boot, you'll find Greg's description of how he did this, and it's actually a good recipe for how to add your own.
Two of them. There's
There's two blogs, that's
one
right.
on JMS and one on the
AMQP.
module.
Yeah.
So, really good
Okay.
stuff.
So do you want to do the Actuator demo? You could just add it to your
sure,
Groovy thing or something.
So this, guys, is something I find quite useful. The Actuator demo is, again, it's about being production ready out of the box, yeah? It's about being as useful as we can out of the box and supporting development and production use cases. So to that end, let's see.
Try to Alt-Tab. Yeah, there we go.
Yes, sir. Okay. Oops. I always forget the, oh boy. Here we go, guys. I'm going to flail around for a minute here. Grab, maybe. Shift. Keep the quotes in the other area. Spring, boot, Actuator.
Starter Actuator.
Yeah, thank you.
Probably better. Spring Boot Actuator is a jar file, but if you do the starter version, it will include some other stuff that might be useful.
And that's it.
That should do it.
Yeah, that's it. That's the entire demo. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. Hopefully, wait, do we have anything else running?
You need to go up a level in the directories. Yeah, that is running, so stop that. On port 9000, actually.
Oh, finally remembered it, and it was too late.
Go up a level, cd.NET.
What?
Yeah, less will do.
Wow, what is suckless tools? The internet, man. The internet is awesome. Okay. Okay.
That's another sign of a UK keyboard. Why did they make the enter key different on a US keyboard? I really don't know.
Farthest. Okay, so that is up and running again. Actually, the output is telling, even here.
Yeah.
So you can see we've got endpoints that have been added to our application. These here, trace,
Yeah, try one.
dump, etc. So go to the browser.
Other one. That one, yeah.
Voila. 8080, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're back to that code. And now the question that we often get asked is, okay, what about the application itself? I want insight into what's happening. Oh, that's pretty. That's pretty printed in the new one.
That's just the Chrome plugin.
Oh, yeah. So these are JSON endpoints that you can work with. They provide information about the application. So, for example, the metrics endpoint. Again, we didn't write these. We didn't. They just come as part of the package. The metrics endpoint will tell you things about how much memory your application have, how many processors you've got, etc. Anything else?
It's also already showing you there that you've had one hit on the root URL with a response status 200.
Right.
You can see that at the top there. Yeah.
So let's go here for that, just to keep it moving. So refresh that. You can see actually I've got information about what's happening. If you want to see the health, a very common question for operations people is, okay, I want to see if my application is still running. What's an easy way to do it? And I remember a lot of, in previous lifetimes, I've helped people put together endpoints that do exactly like this. So for me, I smiled from ear to ear to see this. It's just out of the box. There's a health check you can use. Of course, some people just want to see what's happening in the environment. So they can go to env. Oops. This is your environment. This is exactly what you think it is. It's system.env. It's all the properties in the environment, the environment object themselves.
And you don't have an application.properties in this app, but it would show you that at the bottom as well.
System environments. So good. Again, very good for debugging, very good for understanding what's going on.
It shows you these, by the way, in the order that they're used or searched for property replacement. So if you want to know what the actual value of a property placeholder is in production, you just have to find it in that list. And the first place you find it will be the one that it takes.
Right. Another common question is, okay, what's actually in the application context? Because again, thanks to Spring Boot, a lot of stuff is being done on our behalf. If you want to kind of get visibility into everything, go to beans. So this is basically the application context itself, right? Just dumped as JSON, which in of itself is pretty awesome, nicely done.
If you show one or show auto, I think that's working in this version. Demo gods.
Which one?
Auto.
Auto, yeah, okay. Yep.
No, okay. Oh, that shows you the error page, though.
Oh, yeah.
That's
we have
good.
an error page.
There's an error page by default, which is something you wouldn't get out of the box from Spring MVC.
Right.
Okay, yeah, they must have called that something different. Let's go back to the slides, because we don't want to show absolutely everything there. We don't need to.
Can I show dump?
You can show dump. All right, I'll let you show dump. Thread dump.
So this is the thread dump. Basically, this is actually what the current running state of the application is at the moment. So again, if you want to see what's happening, what the stack, again, very useful tools in debugging, very useful tools in kind of monitoring the application at runtime.
Okay.
Voila. Questions on that, by the way? Just, there's a lot of stuff there. I mean, people ask me about this all the time. Is there a way to get some of this built in, you know? And far be it for us to sell you a monitoring product when we can do a lot of that out of the box.
So yeah, a couple of things you didn't show there, but will be easy to. If you add Spring Security to the class path, all those endpoints that you were showing, that Josh was showing, will now be protected, secure.
Let's do it.
Okay, why not?
That's so cool.
Quickly.
So you can keep So you can keep it in production. You don't have to remember to comment out that one line.
Security.
It's all about production ready REST. Yeah, question, sir.
Can we use this for existing apps? Yeah. So yeah, it's just a bunch of configuration that you could add yourself. You could even use @enable auto configuration in existing apps, but then you'd have to go to Spring 4. I'm just trying to think how much of this depends on Spring 4. You probably do need to have Spring 4 in the class path, otherwise it might try to load the @conditional stuff.
But
So
Spring 4
Spring 4 is imminent, but yeah.
drop-in replacement.
The idea with this is that it's not, you don't have to use the full feature set if you don't want to, right? You can pick and choose. So @enable auto configuration means give me everything. But if you don't like everything, you can add excludes to that. You can just leave off the annotation and include the bits that you want. So they're all just configuration classes.
So go back to the code.
There you go. So I'm getting challenged for a password. That's all I really wanted to show there.
What is the password?
Oh, well, password by default.
He added Spring Boot Starter Security. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry if you didn't notice that. I just added that security dependency. The password is, by default, a random string because you don't want it to be something that you can guess, right? So it's good for development time. You can just copy-paste this, and then you're away to the races. If you want to change the way that behaves, obviously there are ways to override the default behavior, just like with everything else in Spring Boot. So what was I saying? Yeah, so adding this stuff to an existing application. I haven't tried it without Spring 4, but I'm pretty confident if you're using Spring 4, you could just add the relevant config files and it would work. I can show you where they live even. I need to go into, because I haven't got that in the class path, Spring Boot Actuator has an auto-configure package, so you would just add the bits that you want. And the endpoint auto-configuration, those two things would be relevant in that case. If you add those, you get that stuff.
So just to put a finer point on it, production ready, management ready, RESTful web service inside of what is still, I think, tweetable.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. You can also add, since M6, you can add SSH listeners, so you can shell into your app and look around in it. That's really cool.
That's awesome.
There's special mention here for /info. Okay, so that one isn't by default secure, which means that, for instance, in spring.io, there is an info endpoint that is public, and you can see what's running there. That's actually really very useful. Have you ever been there scratching your head going, oh, it's not working, I wonder exactly what version is running there? Well, here we go. I was kind of expecting it would show me a git commit ID, but they must have removed that. You can easily add a git commit ID there, for instance. So you can add any information you want there. It's just a JSON response. And also worth mentioning, there's an audit framework. It's something we see people doing so many times themselves over and over again, right? You've got metrics in there, but also audit. There's two different sort of new API frameworks that you could use and extend. If you want to audit stuff, I could show you something being audited, actually, if I was to, where did it go? Oh, there's this one, wasn't it? If I just cancel that, then I'll get 401 response and a white label error page. That was a better way to see the error response. And in the log, there's an audit event. Right, an authentication object was not found in the security context. So that means that somebody just cancelled their authentication, basically. You would also see other kinds of security events here. So those are the only audit events that we provide out of the box. If you want to add your own, it's easy. There's a nice API for it. And the easiest way to consume it is to publish an event of type audit event.
So awesome.
Okay, slides. Adding security, we've done that. There are lots of ways to configure it. Documentation is work in process. Show them the shell, all right. Show them the shell, all right.
Come on,
You
it's
want
so cool.
You want to show them?
Yeah.
Come on,
No, you do it.
All right,
I just
you
want
do
to
it.
watch you giggle.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
So I actually don't need Spring Security in this case, but if I do use Spring Security, then it will be the same username password, which is kind of neat. But let's just do it without
What's
for
the
now.
username?
Username is user
Well, okay.
by default. You can change that.
Gotta have
It's
an opinion somewhere.
another config file option. So I'm going to do -w now, so I can keep changing that without restarting it. That verbo stuff, by the way, is just me. Oh, interesting. Did
What'd
I
we do?
forget to add something?
Spring Boot starter remote shell
I
isn't.
think it's still using snapshots or something. No, that's shell remote, idiot. Okay, there we go. You just need to know how to type.
Yeah.
If I'd been more confident there. Because I was just saying, all this rubbish that you see in the logs is actually just me, my local machine. Oh, didn't like that either. Why did you persuade me to do this?
No idea.
Spring Boot
We just
starter
upgraded,
shell
so we're
remote.
like literally last night.
The M6 is just out, and I'm not even sure if I'm using it at the minute. Okay, so I'm not going to try and get that right. It'll take me too long. By default, you're going to get an SSH endpoint on port 2000 that you can just log in and poke around in the application.
From the Maven version, which you can control, you'd get that working.
Yeah. All right. I have tried that in Groovy, and it worked. So, yeah, don't know. Building a WAR file, I've mentioned this several times. I'll say it again. There's a sample that I can show you. So there's this thing here, this Spring Boot Servlet initializer. If you've ever used Servlet 3, then you'll recognize that idiom. The
Programmatic equivalent of web.xml.
Yeah, is it traditional or is it web UI? I can't remember. Probably this one. I could just look for it, instances of that, couldn't I? That one?
Command-Shift-R? Or Control-Shift-R?
This one. Yeah, that's probably what I need to do. Spring Boot Servlet Initializer. There we go. It's the WebSockets one. Okay. So the WebSockets sample is, it has a main method, so I can run that as an executable WAR file as well. But it has this override method here. SpringApplicationBuilder configures a builder and sets its sources, and that's basically the same as this, right? So the main method mirrors the configure method, just so I can run it as an executable WAR, but the WAR is deployable in a regular Servlet 3 container.
Yay. Just show of hands. How many of you are using Servlet 3, Tomcat 7, something of that sort? Oh, right on.
Enough.
Yeah, a lot of you. Good.
Enough. So, I mean, again, if you want to, you can still use web.xml. If you have an older container, it'll work. Spring 4 is actually still supporting Servlet 2.5, but I think we're deprecating it.
We are?
I think so. We're deprecating. So if you want to continue using Servlet 2.5, that's fine. But when we get to Spring 5, or maybe 4.5 or something, we'll probably remove support for Servlet 2.5 at some point.
We tend to support things 5 years past their prime, for good reasons, of course.
Yeah, people are still using Servlet 2.5. That's fine. If they want to, they can. So web.xml is just a different way of configuring all the same stuff. Okay, so how do you customize? How do you customize all this stuff? I've shown you lots of features, but I'm sure you're itching to change it, or at least add your own stuff. So the first thing you customize, obviously, is your own content, and that's the stuff that's important. Remember, though, it's just Spring. So you can add as much Spring configuration that's relevant to business content as you like, using the usual stuff, XML if you like it. How many people actually like configuring configuration with XML? A few. Okay, fine. How many people hate it? More. Okay. I'm ambivalent, right?
Yeah.
I'm kind of both. I
kind of like.
I used to be the XML champion. I used to be the guy who said that XML is the best way to do it. But actually, since I've been doing this boot stuff, I haven't used it. And you know what?
Do you miss it?
I don't miss it. No. So, you know, that's a lesson for everybody, right? If you stay inside your box, sometimes you just don't realize what you're missing.
There's some places where it's perfectly fine for higher level DSLs. Like
yeah, DSLs is mainly the reason I would use it, I think. Spring batch, Spring integration, yeah.
Oh, I like the batch Java config API.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Anyway, there are actually Bean Builder is the thing that we haven't quite added support for, but Spring 4 has Groovy Bean Builder as another configuration option, which is quite nice. Good. Okay, so then the next thing you can do is customize the application context. So the way that it's actually created using these application context initializers. There's actually two different initialization callbacks. One of them is the application context initializer that I just showed you. Any of those that also implement an additional interface, Spring Application Initializer, those will also get a callback with the Spring application itself, which is a higher level concept, I guess, than the application context. So there are two callbacks. And by default, what we do is we read, this is a common Spring idiom actually, but it's not that commonly known about. So there is a file, special file that's been in Spring since 2.0, I'm guessing, spring.factories, which Spring has attaches a special meaning to. So it's a service factory based meaning to. So it's a service factory basically. I'll just show you the examples.
Based on the Java 6.
It's a bit like the Java 6 service locator pattern, yeah, except it's Spring native. So the reason we did it is so that we could support older JVMs.
That's true, yeah.
So if you looked in Autoconfigure, for instance, you would see meta-inf Spring factories, and if you looked in the Actuator, you would see meta-inf Spring factories. Let's just look at that one. So this one is a properties file where the key is enable autoconfiguration. It's the name of the annotation class. And then it's a list of configuration files, right? Those are the ones that I just showed when somebody asked me if I could add these features. It's a list. So the auto-configuration is set up that way. The initializers are also set up that way. So there's the application context initializer, and auto-configuration report logging initializer is added in addition to anything that you get out of the box. And the ones that you get out of the box are the ones that we think you'd always want, like the config file thing, like Spring Boot doesn't really behave the way you'd expect if he doesn't load that application.properties and bind that. So we don't let you opt into that. You could opt out, but don't let you opt into that. Okay, so initializer callbacks. That's another way to customize things. So somebody came up to me at after another presentation I'd done on this and said they wanted to change the banner, or they wanted to add their own banner. And I said, oh, that's the best way to do it. Just add initializer. So that's what he did.
Really?
And then now he's got his, com.mycompany banner showing on his Spring applications. Yeah. And I imagine, in a corporate environment, you do want to customize this stuff. You want to have your own corporate settings embedded in everybody's applications. Just the environment's different. That's fine. So this is the
and a warning
mechanism we give you. So here it is again. Spring factories for enable auto configuration. So that's how it works. In other words, if you want to add more auto configuration, you just add a jar file to your class path with that file in it, telling Spring what to do. And you can make it as conditional as you want. That's what we've done, right? So none of it has to be loaded. We won't even load the classes unless the conditions are true. Okay, then the Groovy CLI has some additional customization points. You can change, for instance, the things where we added the imports for you automatically, the AST transformations. There's a general Groovy mechanism called abstract syntax tree transformation, which we capitalize on. You can provide your own of those as well, but we have a special one that just does things that we're interested in, like dependencies and imports. So you can do that.
It's kind of mind-bending, so beware if you start looking into the AST transform stuff.
Yeah, it's very convenient though.
Mind expanding.
We try not to be too evil with it, right? We only do things that we set defaults for things that you would have done anyway.
Right. Yeah, totally.
You can also add script commands. I'm not sure if that's so easy to do at the minute in M6 because that's actually in a bit of transitional state. But in principle, at least, you could write a script, foo.groovy, that had the foo command in it, and then Spring foo would work. If anybody really wants to do that, I'll show you how to. More commonly, what might want to do is customize the servlet container. So I showed you very quickly that you could change the ports just using an application property entry. There are several other things that you can change there, and the way to find out what they are is to look at the bean that it binds to. Right, this is one of the benefits of using that at configuration binding thing. So server properties. I should have changed the font size, shouldn't I? Because I hope that people can read it. But basically, it's a bean, and it has properties. So you could bind to the port, which we've done, or you could bind to the internet address, the NIC card that you want to bind to. You could change the context path. So instead of being slash to get the home page, it could be slash demo or something. Anyway, so there's stuff there you can bind to. If it's Tomcat specific, you can also bind to other stuff that people often do in Tomcat.
Professor?
Yes?
What about Jetty?
Jetty's there. We haven't spent a lot of time adding those features for Jetty, but there is a Jetty implementation of... okay, so the key thing is that this interface, embedded servlet container customizer, you can implement that. That's what I was going to show on the slide here. You can implement those things, and you can implement the ones that depend on Tomcat, ones that depend on Jetty, or ones that are common to both, right? So
that Twitter discussion recently, somebody wanted to do SSL.
Yeah, that's right. So somebody asked me the other day, can we terminate SSL? I said yes.
It's just Tomcat, after all.
It's Tomcat, and Jetty can do it too. And the way you do it is you implement one of these, you add it as a bean in the application context, and you can see it if you follow me or probably at Josh or at Spring Central on Twitter. You can probably pick up that conversation and see that he raised an issue on GitHub, and he actually provided some code to show us how to do it. So we'll probably add that. But anyway, you can customize various things like the connector properties, adding valves to Tomcat, changing thread pools. Those kinds of things are commonly done in these customizers.
One of a million different examples of where best part of Spring is you guys,
Yeah, so that's what you need. I mean, we've sort of taken a straw poll of what we often do, and the things that so server.xml is the XML file that you do in Tomcat, right? Things that we often change in there, we've put already in our server properties, but anything else is possible, as long as it's in the Tomcat APIs, right? Okay, so those are the customization options, basically, plenty of them, and plenty of directions for us to go in as well. There are some other features in Spring Boot that I talked about briefly in the tools section. And so when I was running that jar file, java-jar, let's actually look inside that jar file and see what's in there. So it was dev, demo, workspace. There's the jar file. There's the manifest that it wrote. So this manifest was prepared by the Spring Boot Maven plugin. You see it's got a main class, which makes it an executable jar file. I'm sure that's just a normal Java feature. And the main class is not the one that we wrote, right? It's not the application class. It's a special boot thing. It's a jar launcher. And the jar launcher then looks for another attribute called start class and runs that one. So it's kind of delegation pattern. It delegates to a main method. But at the same time, this thing has the smarts to add all of the stuff that it needs to the class path. So if you have a lib directory in your jar file with jar files in it, okay, it's an uber jar of some sort, then that's where that jar launcher looks. And so if you prepare a jar file in this format, all you need then is to have, the jar launcher has to be there on the class path. So that's the thing that the plugin was doing. It was adding those org Spring Framework boot stuff to the jar file. So there's a jar launcher, a wall launcher, and a properties launcher, which I actually haven't covered in the slides, but you can see if you read the README for the tools. So they basically just look in different places for jar files. The war launcher looks, as well as webinflib, it also looks in provided -lib, so you can provide your executable war embedded servlet container. The Tomcat jars themselves don't have to go in webinflib. So a bit of technical stuff on how we actually do that. It's code that's lying around on the internet, right? If you Google it, you'll find that lots of people have done this. It's not actually rocket science. All we've done, we haven't written a class loader. We've just overridden the way that the resources are loaded for the class loader. So if there's an entry on the class path that is inside a nested jar, then we kind of dereference it for you. And this is about how that's done. So a jar file is structured like this. You have entries, okay, inside your application jar, and inside Spring jars there are other entries. And what we've done is nested them, right? We've got a lib directory with a jar file that's got these extra things in it. And a normal out-of-the-box URL class loader doesn't know how to reference those. But ours does, so it just overloads the resource loading for the class loader, basically. So to seek inside that nested jar, couple of restrictions. They're not major ones for most people, but it can't do, because of the jar file format restrictions, you can't compress the entries, so we have to be able to search them. And the main thing is that, apart from no compression, you occasionally run into libraries that make assumptions on the URLs for nested resources, and some of those have broken Spring Boot applications. And if you find those, that's fine. We can probably work around it. You can tell us about it, and we'll add support for them. So anybody use, what's that database loader thing? Liquibase. Anybody use Liquibase? A couple of people, right? So they have a different opinion about how to load resources from the class path. But fortunately, they provide a way to override it. So as soon as we knew that Liquibase wasn't working in a Spring Boot application, we just provided a workaround. Actually, that was really easy. We just had to make a package for every resource because it used the packaged information in its assumptions. The best thing you can do, though, to be safe, is in your own code, is to use Spring abstractions. Okay, so resource is a Spring core, org.springframework.io.resource. Use that abstraction everywhere, and you should be safe. And also, if you ever need to get access to a class loader, don't use get system class loader. You probably shouldn't do that anyway, but in this case, you'll find that it won't work. Of course, you don't need to use this. If you want to, you can just use different executable jar mechanisms will work. So some people have already been doing this with the Shade plugin in Maven, or you can just use a war file and deploy it. The problem with the Shade plugin and other versions of the same thing that I've seen is that it doesn't nest the jar files, it nests the resources in the jar file. So everything is a big flat tree, right? So you get all of your... main problem is metainf. Files in metainf can have the same name in different jar files, manifest.mf, for instance. And it has, some hacky workaround strategies that you can try to enable to work around clashes in those, but it doesn't really work as well as it could. So we thought we did a better job. But go ahead and use Shade if you like it. Testing. So if you want to test your Spring application, you can test in the, I guess what I would say is test in the normal way that you would any Spring application, but what we've done is we've provided a context loader for the Spring test support. So if you're using @context configuration, we have a special loader. All that does is add the application context initializers, right? So you won't be surprised when your application context comes up and it hasn't found the properties file, which is the first thing that would happen if you didn't use this. So let me just show you this in action. Actually, I could probably do it in my little demo app, couldn't I? So this demo has already got a test. Oh, it's already got it loaded. Okay, so this was part of the downloaded
Start
a project, yeah, the initializer project. So it has loader equals Spring Application Context Loader, which means that everything from application properties, for instance, will be loaded in this application context. And if I was to @value auto inject a value here of I have group, don't I? Group private string group, and then I can sys group. So we'll be able to see it. Anything running in the background? No. Oh, sorry, I ran the application. I was supposed to run the test. There we go. The test runs. It's successful because the application context could load, and it's printed out the value from the file system that I set up. So you just need to do that if you're running tests in an application context. Interestingly, if you is that how you do web MVC? Web app configuration. There you go. So if you want to do a Spring MVC test, all this stuff is included on the class path in the starter test. Okay, that one. So that gives you things like Spring test, Spring boot test support, which is just one class at the minute, and JUnit and Hamcrest and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of Mockito. There are things that we use a lot that we just don't want to fuss around with. If you don't like the choice that we made, fine, you can just delete that, right, and add your own. Choice is yours. But I'd prefer to get started as quickly as possible. So what was I going to do? I was going to show you a web MVC test. I can show you one of those because I've got one pre-built in the JPA sample. So in the samples, Spring Data JPA has a test. Oops, test. Spring Data JPA application test. Okay, so it's a web app configuration. It has an active profile just to show that it works. This was set up so that you don't get clash between different databases and different test cases. That happens quite a lot with this kind of integration test. Because it's a web app configuration, this might not be a feature that you've seen before, but it isn't Spring Boot, it's Spring Test. I can auto-wire a web application context, and then I can create one of these mock MVC objects, and these are incredibly useful. This is what I was talking about with Thymeleaf. You can say MVC perform get your home page, and then make assertions about it, right, including the content of the HTML. Try doing that with JSPs.
Remember, it has to get compiled, so it's a whole different problem.
Yeah, that's right.
So this stuff, by the way, the Spring test stuff has been available in some form or another since 3.0 got really good in 3.1, and even
now it's
newer
packaged
stuff.
Slightly differently, but yeah, it's been available for a while. The only new thing here is actually this, the Spring Application Context Loader. I think maybe what I could do, just to round everything off, is maybe, because somebody was asking me about JPA and component scan, maybe we could just add that to the demo and then we'll finish. Sure. Yeah?
Take
do you
questions.
Want to do that, or?
No, you carry on. That means we have a lot of time for questions, so please, start thinking about them. We love questions.
So to do that, I would, first thing I'll do is add, actually, you know what, I don't want a web application anymore. I'm just going to do a backend data JPA with test. That's fine, isn't it? I'm going to need a database now, though, so I'm going to need those JPA things again. Spring boot starter JDBC, and no, the other one was a database, wasn't it? com.h2.
What about the other one, HSQL?
I could use HSQL, yeah, all right. Yeah, so it's another thing that just depends on the class path, right? If you want to use HSQL, you can do that. You can use Apache Derby. We prefer, if we find H2 on the class path, we'll prefer that, just because it has better transaction semantics, but you don't have to use that. Oops, deleted something crucial there. Okay, so now I'm going to also show, it's not a web application. Actually, so I don't have to show anything if I'm just going to test it, don't I? But I could show you quickly implements command line runner, right? And then run, and I'll do my sys print out the group there. Okay, so if I run this as a Java application instead of a test, then there's my file system properties, right? And now, actually, you've already seen some different behavior. You've seen Hibernate starting up. Created a schema, even. Why did it do that? Because we noticed that you had an embedded database, right? You've got HSQL in there, so obviously you want something to happen. Well, you might want something to happen. Actually, so we just chose the default to be, if it's an embedded database, then let Hibernate create the schema for you, because that's what most people want when they first add the dependency, right? They haven't actually made any opinions yet. It didn't create any tables because I haven't got any entities, so I'm just now going to create some entities. New class, book, and make that an @entity. It'll need an @ID, won't it? Private long ID. Don't need anything else for now. So if I start that application again, you see it created a table. Actually, it dropped it first and then created it. So we're using create drop as the default strategy. You can change that. Obviously, you can just add something in application.properties, and that would override that behavior. Since somebody was asking about Spring Data JPA, I'm going to add a repository, book.
How many of you have used Spring Data in any of the underlying projects? Right on, guys. Spring Data is an umbrella project. It's got a lot of different modules. One great concept common to a lot of these modules is the idea of a repository, which Dave is creating right here.
Actually, that one, yes, I probably do want to do that. I don't think it matters, actually, but extends, pageable, sortable, something like that.
Paging and sorting repository.
Paging and sorting.
Yep.
There we go, yeah.
It's genericized. It's got the type and then the type of the ID for the entity. And it provides methods for finding all, for deleting, for reading, for iterating across, etc. And then the implementation of the methods in the body of the interface themselves are by convention. So if you create find books by title and name, or whatever, it'll actually generate a query saying select all from books where title and equals question mark and name equals question mark.
Okay, so
you don't have to provide the implementation. Sorry.
I just created that method find all, and I'm going to inject it. Auto-wired private book repository. Oops. Book repository books, and then I can do this books.find all, and there won't be any, right? But it'll print something. So let's just make sure that works. There we go. It's printed an empty list. So there's Spring Data JPA being set up with no fuss, right? All I did was include the
Can you insert some data?
Annotation. Can I insert some data? Do you want me to write a SQL script?
Yes, I do. For fun and profit.
Somebody might have to dictate this. Yeah. Okay, so I don't know if you know, but JPA by default, if you run it in create drop mode, will actually load import.sql from your class path. I also like to have my own opinions about that. So Spring Boot loads schema.sql, which is a Spring JDBC default. And we've also added in Spring Boot, we've added platform-specific stuff. So HSQLDB is the platform name. I can add an HSQLDB specific SQL script here, and it will load that. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to load SQL, schema.sql. So I can insert into book.
Parenthesis ID.
Yeah, ID, values. You'd think I'd be able to remember this stuff by now. There we go, semicolon. And so then when I run this application, I will be able to fingers crossed, see it printing a book. There we go. There's a book.
Not bad, guys. That's like, I mean, what is the total class? We got 3 classes here?
Over 3 classes,
and a test.
One of them is longer than it needs to be, just to show it working. So yeah, now let's do the test, right? So in the test, I can auto-buy the books repository, and then now I can make an assertion, which is actually a lot better than just books created. A lot better than just an empty assertion, which is what we had before, basically. So assert, I could do the fancy Hamcrest thing, but I'm just going to do equals 1 books.findAll.size, because I know that
too.
Yeah, there probably is. Yeah. But yeah, okay. So count. Yeah, I could just do that. All right, count.
All that you get for free, just by an interface.
All right. Should I run it?
Right on. Fail? What do we do?
Demo gods are not found. Servlet context. Why does it want that? Oh, because I told it was a web application. I was still working on that. I'm sorry. So the
you guys won't have these problems?
Test dependencies. Yeah, you won't be trying to do a demo. There we go. Green. All right. So we have approximately 15 minutes left. We basically came to the end of our material, but that's there isn't. Well, it isn't the end of what we could show in Spring Boot. So maybe we should just take some questions now.
Yeah. Phil Webb there.
Force you to, oh yeah, there's Phil's address. Force you to
there you go.
Engage a bit.
Normally, in an high-level configuration, you need to design a package to scan. Is there default package?
Okay, so the question is, in the Hibernate configuration was there a default package to scan? Which actually was the question that you asked in the break, so I'm glad you reminded me. So at component scan, this is the way that Spring Boot works. It remembers all the component scans you did, and if any of them, actually it just remembers the base packages, and then it feeds them into the repository creator. So at component scan has a default, which is the package that you're in when you annotate the class. So at component scan, I put it on my application configuration, but if I wanted to, I could split that up into multiple different packages, and they would all default to their own parent package. So at component scan is there. It's crucial that it's there, actually, not just because I want to pick up the book repository and auto-wire it, but also because I want Spring data to create the repository implementation for me, and I didn't have to do anything else. I just did a component scan, and the component scan had a repository in it. That was all I needed.
I have some questions.
Go on, Josh.
Guys, what do you think? Was this awesome? Brand new, like really much more productive way of working. Are you guys going to check it out? Right on.
Good. I can hear positive noises.
Before you guys, we'll take all the questions we can, but some people are filtering away. Just thank you for coming, and be sure to check out the BOF tonight, and Ben Hale's talk on REST is later on this week. Andy Piper, you have a talk? Oh, the booth. Oh, the booth. We're going to be hanging around at the booth downstairs for the balance of the week, so please don't hesitate to come by and say hi.
Guillaume's talking about Groovy, right? So
Guillaume is talking about Groovy. There's a lot of good stuff. It's going to be a great show. Thanks for coming and all that. Thank you very much. Now questions.
Yeah, as many questions as you want, or just come down. I don't mind.
Yep. Likewise.
Yep. Do you need to do something special for multi-module projects? I'm trying to think what that would be. I don't think so. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, you're doing packaging. I mean, the way it works, the @enable auto-configuration, it just literally looks on the class path at runtime. So maybe you'd have unintended consequences if one module made assumptions about the class path that weren't true in the final build. You'd have to protect against that somehow with tests, I guess. But no, nothing special. Yes? Oh, the auto-refresh. Okay, how do you do auto-refresh while you're in development mode? 2 ways. One, which I didn't properly demonstrate, was this -W option on the command line, so that works. in the Groovy case. For Spring, you get any features that you get from your Java IDE environment. So, for instance, if I was just to change the implementation, I said not a web application, but if you change the implementation of a method without changing its signature, then Eclipse will just insert the code, hot replace it, right? And the third option is to use something like JRebel, is it called? And the fourth option would be Spring Loaded. If you haven't heard of Spring Loaded, check it out on GitHub. It's a Java agent that you can...
Inside of STS, too?
Inside of STS, too, actually, you can load inside of STS. That means that you can change the method signature as well.
Just a checkbox.
Yeah.
So simple.
And things like UI templates, those you can always reload. Class paths resources.
Yeah. Other questions? Oh, yeah. Hi.
Do you have an idea when the slides will be made publicly?
Slides are, so do I have an idea when the slides are public? They are when the slides are public. They are already public if you know the right location. So yeah, those are pretty close to what we just showed.
Different corpus in there, but same thing.
Yeah, there's a
Very good.
GitHub project where you can find the source code if you want that, but dsci.com prezos decks. Or if you look on Lanyard, just look on Lanyard for this show. This presentation has already got a link on it to that. Yeah, any more?
Thoughts, feedback, questions?
Yeah, anytime you want, anytime you like.
Belgian beer? We'll take it, whatever. It's all good. Yeah.
How would we compare it with Spring Roo? Do you want to answer that, or shall I?
I will, from my perspective, as a guy who wrote a book on Spring Roo, they're very different things, right? So Spring Roo is all about solving a problem that a lot of people don't have as much today. It's about code generation. It's about making it easy for developers to use all these artifacts that are in typical, that used to be typical applications, typical enterprise applications. You know, the synchronization of Maven build files and property files and descriptors and all this stuff. Well, as you've clearly just seen, that's all about development time. That's all about the build time and compile time sort of optimizations and synchronizing your domain model with your view template and so on. Well, again, today you're gonna build views and all that, but as often as not, they're gonna be RESTful backends with rich clients on the client. This is a different world. This is a different place. So I think a lot of it is they're different problems. One solves the problem of making persistence.xml go away.
There's nothing wrong with Roo, but I mean,
right.
yeah, it's a different approach. Yeah, I imagine that if Roo started now, it would probably generate Spring Boot artifacts instead of normal Spring artifacts, right? So I think it's just a different approach to getting started quickly. Spring Roo, if you like, well, I think the classic problem is the one that Josh mentioned, the synchronizing your views with your domain objects, right? So that's business domain stuff. Spring Boot really can't help you with that. So Roo could if that was what you wanted. But on the other hand, you might not need it because you might, as Josh said, just be using XML or JSON to render your domain objects anyway automatically. So you might not need the synchronization that Roo gave you. Nothing against Roo. Yeah. The last committer for Spring Roo left Pivotal in January, I think. So there's nobody that we employ who's still committing to it, but it doesn't mean it's not still there. People are still contributing to it, I believe.
Yeah.
And I hope to see it using Spring Boot in the future. I don't see why it wouldn't.
Other questions? Yeah.
Can you use at repository generation without using
Spring data repositories? You can, actually. Yeah, I didn't know there was anybody who would actually be interested in that, but yeah, you can. It works with JSR 299. There's support for that. I've never used it, but it's there. Yeah, weird question, but yeah. Did you contribute to it, or were you the guy that helped develop that part?
Trying to understand Java EE6 and JPA.
I'm sorry, man. Listen, I give out hugs. I give out hugs as a service, as part of what I do. If you want a hug,
You
I'm
should
here.
repeat the question, Josh.
Oh, the question was, can you use it with
Yeah.
Java
the
EE
reason was
without the Spring stuff? But yes, I don't understand why you would, but yes, you can.
Spring generally is usable inside traditional enterprise containers, right? I mean, it always has been and probably always will be. That was one of the original motivations, was to be that, you could run it anywhere. Spring runs anywhere. So I would imagine the answer is usually yes to that kind of question.
Well, he's saying
But
without.
Spring Boot is going to have an opinion about that. It's going to say, no, if you put Tomcat in the class path, you really meant to use Tomcat, so we'll do it that way. That kind of.
Oh, wait, maybe I misunderstood the question.
No, I don't think so.
Was he asking about using it on a W application server?
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, then of course, yes. But in this, there's also a separate thing where it just works, that one little feature.
Yeah, so maybe there's sort of a spectrum of responses to that question, right? There's a spectrum of problems that you might have. You might want to use a JE container and you don't care about having a few Spring jars on your class path, or it depends on the amount of pruning you want to do. Any more questions?
Okay. Hey guys, thank you so much.
We're ready.
See you around.
Thanks.
Come to the BOF tonight. We'll be there to drink a beer and talk to you guys about anything and everything.
Yeah, bring beer.
Yeah. Thank you.